Hey there, rulers. Welcome back after a long week of Force of Will. School is out, but if you need some extra homework or some extra assistance on that assignment, you can stop on in to the office hours. Welcome to our new show, second episode, and spoilers have started, so we're back to this instead of lesson planning. I am joined tonight by the wonderful Mike Rance.
That's me, yay. Spoiler time, boys.
And for the first time, appearing with his face on camera, in 5 years of doing ruler school, it's Paul Reisman.
Where?
It's Paul.
Hi. Oh, you're talking about me. Okay, I'm here. Oh my gosh.
No
Even
face.
I didn't know I was on camera.
Paul has been the voice of our tournament reports and my partner in crime in doing feature matches for the longest time. We are happy to be able to bring him on for this show as a part of the talking. So everybody in the chat, let's get some Keurig flexes for the members for Paul in chat for his first appearance. Some Keurig flexes. If you're interested on how you can get access to those emotes, you can click that join button right down below. It gets you access to, for the non-office hours streams, the chats, as well as the emotes and the badges by your name and all kinds of other perks. So check those out. I also do want to give a quick thanks to our sponsor of today's podcast, which is CCG Prime. They sponsored tonight's podcast. We're very, very grateful for it. There is a link down below in the description that you guys all need to check out because they are currently running an Epic of the Dragon Lord giveaway contest. To get ready for that, you can click that link. It takes you to the event. And then what you can do is you either can say that you're going to the event, like the event, or make a purchase at ccgprime.com and gets you entered into the giveaway. They're doing, they're getting access to pre-release promos, and one of the giveaway entries is even a full set, one of each, of full art Marvel rares from Epic of the Dragon Lord when it comes out. So, you know, for those shiny lovers, you can go ahead and check that out too. And then each purchase made from the site, each individual purchase will get you an entry as well. They have a ton of singles from throughout Force of Will's history, including going all the way back to Valhalla. So if you're looking to pick up some of that stuff, you can check that out. Over 40,000 Force of Will singles, with more being added every day, including promos, hard to find promos that you maybe have been looking for. Also to note here, any single purchases of $20 or more will get you a free pack of sleeves. And if you mention Ruler's School anywhere in your order, you will add in a playset of original foil stoning to deaths for the first 10 people to make an order and mention Ruler School in there. So thank you so much, Dan and CCG Prime, for hooking us up with that. Go check them out. But tonight, we are talking spoilers. We have seen all six rulers, as well as a brand new card type. And yeah, we got a lot to get into. So let's go ahead. Let's just go ahead and jump right in before we get too far. So we're starting off with Oberozuki, Star Sword Visionary. You can see her on the screen, so I'm not gonna read through everything here. Seemingly, her whole kind of concept is that on her front side, she's going to be gaining and giving +1/+1 counters by revealing the top card of her deck, and then on her backside, we get to see that she can take +1/+1 counters and spend them herself for doing other things. She doesn't have a way to generate them on the back. She can just spend them, and has flying and drain, and it's a 12/12. So white on the front, dual color on the back. Guys, give me your thoughts.
First things first. I really like the floating sword in the artwork.
Yep.
Very nice. Everybody's been talking about it, so I had to put it out there.
Yeah, for sure.
But either way, this is actually something that I remember going over when we were doing the post-interview at GP Minnesota, where I was saying how a lot of the things that I wanted from rulers going forward is the fact that they have board-centric abilities on their front side, activated board-centric abilities. And Oberozuki was the first step into that foray that I'm like, all right, my wishes are coming true, I guess. The biggest thing about her is that she's basically just free stats. You kind of look back to, say, Reflect Refrain from back in the Twilight Wanderer, where one of his abilities was 0 mana, choose one of 3, and one of the 3 was give something +2/+2 until end of turn, which is one that probably the least got used. I would say most people tried using the sculpting effect, or a lot of people back before he got eroded used him to put out turn 1 feed things. But
Yeah.
back in those days, huh? But the biggest thing is that I really like the fact that she doesn't really see, like, she doesn't, from what we know so far, we don't really see like a specific direction that we want to use her for, other than just kind of manipulating these counters. But it is very important to note that she essentially is like the first bit of like eternal support for a mechanic that's been used throughout Force of Will's history, something that was explored with machines, but to a little bit more of a generic, like a more generalized version of that kind of trigger, and just giving things an extra permanent +2/+2 whenever you want. By obviously revealing the top card of your deck, so you need to be playing stuff with Light Will, but we'll see with the split cards that we could actually see a lot of Light Will symbols in these cards going forward. Which
Yeah,
is
for sure. Oh, I just didn't really think about that. Yeah, we'll have to talk about that because
That's really
suddenly a split card, that's a 1/2 is actually 3, and you're like, whoa, this is great. Get some real value.
Or if it's 4/4 and it's an 8, and you just give something +8/+8 whenever you want. Oh
my gosh. What I think is really cool about that is you actually have to pay attention to the will cost now. So like,
yep.
Does it benefit me to play this card if I get one less +1/+1 counter? And that leads into like a whole nother style of deck building. So I'm looking at this ruler, and I the reason I love it is because it can just go across the entire gamut of like deck building. It can be more aggressive, it can be more mid-rangey, it can be a control ruler if you want it to be.
Yeah, aggressive ruler, because I've been thinking about the first thing that I thought of, because it's been a kind of a pet deck of mine, is working out with the old Gil Alhamat historical starter deck, which has always been like something that never really got explored in terms of its potential and how far it went. But one of the cards in there, the 1-drop Sylvia, who had an awakening that put like 16 +1/+1 counters on her and dealt 2,000 to the board, and whenever she has any amount of +1/+1 counters on her, she gains first strike, swiftness, precision, and flying, I think
so, yeah.
She gets like a ton of abilities. So I'm like, okay, so what if I just play her turn 1 and then activate Oberozuki, put 2 counters on her, and say, okay.
Yeah, for sure. Like, to me,
that's solid.
To me, I think, to your point, Paul, it's very right. Like, I look at this and I go, well, first off, regardless of any spoilers that we would need to see, right, because we still have so much of the set left to see, I look at Oberozuki and I go, okay, I am immediately thinking of ways that I could build her with stuff that we already have. Like, in Epic Stories, in Conqueror format, in New Frontiers, and everything else. So, like, that to me is very, very exciting and, like, gets my hype up, because, like, there was so much of New Valhalla and, to a point, Alice Origins, where, like, you saw the ruler and the deck kind of, like, built itself for the most part. Like,
a lot of like the support that was put out in their starter decks and the sets they were in. You're like, okay, cool. This was designed for this.
Right.
This by name.
Ken Tober, very competitive player, earned his invite at Collinsville. He and I had a conversation about how Alice Origins and New Valhalla, even before that, felt very much like, here's your deck. Like, it didn't really, the design space of being able to get creative in your deck building wasn't really as fluid as it has been in the history of Force of Will. And this ruler, in my opinion, and really all of the rulers which we'll get to, feel like that again, where it's like, obviously I want to see her support, but my brain is going a ton of different directions on how you could build Obo. So
the best thing about her, in my opinion, there's a couple of the rulers that feel like they're like kind of building up to something. Like, we're going to see how Lilius looks like she's building up to something. Welser builds up to something. Even Celesta builds up to something. Oberozuki is one of those ones where it's like, you don't really have to build up to something. You just kind of have to play your general tempo game plan, your general mid-range game plan, and then if you're in a pickle, you're just like, all right, cool, let's flip, and I'll final battle your board real quick. Thanks, guys.
And one of the other things to note here that I think is really interesting as just like a mid-range concept is that Oberozuki on her backside is an instant speed final battle that can be selectively, that can be built up on and stacked up on more than once. So here, like, the idea of, like, if you're talking mid-range strategy, right? So typically in the form of mid-range, it's build up a board, find a way to push through your opponent's board, right? Well, with Obo, what you can do is you can swing with one thing that has +1/+1 counters on it. If they block it, great. If they don't, cool, you've got damage. Then it doesn't need its +1/+1s anymore, so you get to steal those back to Oberozuki, who can then use them as a mini instant speed final battle for 1 tick, 2 tick, 3 tick, which then sets up your next person to be able to push through, which then can then give you more freedom to be able to set up another 1, 2, 3 tick, that kind of stuff.
And the fact that she comes very stock with a big body, plus gains counters for herself, plus the fact that she comes to drain means that she's also she's just like a life gaining body. Hard to block it because she's got flying and drain. Obviously, she doesn't have swiftness. You got to like give her that in order to get like a full value out of that. But still, like just having access to such a huge body that can swing and then hold on to the counters for the cracked back play.
That is like that
really
as well.
There's a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, very sure. I do think they designed her properly. You know, this is kind of my last point before we move on to Lilius. Like, they designed her really well to have to balance both sides. Like, her ruler side can only generate and give, and her J ruler side can only take and spend. So you have to be careful. Like, you can't just turbo flip her, because then if she dies and you wouldn't have good generation, sure, I guess the rest of your game can be generate and give, but then you don't get that added bonus of being able to use them in a different way. So
here's a fun story.
That yin yang of it is really cool for me.
She reminds me more of old Kirik than Lilius does. In terms of
absolutely.
Spending on the backside.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You don't want to get stuck on the backside. People would go out of their way not to kill Kirik back in the day, because it was so advantageous
to not let them generate. Absolutely, for sure. So it'll be interesting to see where she lies in terms of both deck building and in terms of in the meta. Speaking of Lilius, not who isn't Kirik, let's talk about Lilius. So Lilius, who is not Kirik and is also not Sylvia. So interestingly enough, you know, once again, strength counters are back, which I think is cool. Mike and I and Paul and I, you guys have had the conversation of it's really cool to see them bring back this concept of strength counters, but explore it in a very different way. Strength counters, Rhea Cluster was all about, this is your additional resource. Like, everyone was producing a different resource, right? Everybody was doing it. Crystals, the weather in that sense, elementals for actual will, strength counters for spending for cards. But like, strength counters now, at least from what we're seeing just with Lilius, is kind of I buffed up with strength counters, and so then I'm going to get static bonus for having reached that level, which is a very different design space. So it'll be interesting to see like what else they can explore with that, while
much
still
more
giving
flavorful.
while still also giving us a flash to what we can speak to. So interestingly enough, Lilius also, all of these rulers you're going to see have this kind of zero cost once per turn during your turn kind of effect. It's definitely the way that they have said, well, we don't get Regalia triggers, we don't have an extra deck. You need something on your ruler side that you can use consistently to kind of keep up with the pressure that Regalia decks can provide, which I think is great. Like, can you imagine being one of these new rulers, your opponent doesn't hit Regalia till like turn 4, and you've pulled off your like zero cost 3 times by then, and you're like, okay, cool, you can get your 2 effects. I've also generated value for nothing.
You're not tying the ruler to something in the deck. You're tying the ruler like
to itself.
You can build the deck however you want. Yep.
So so then she also has an interesting tap effect of put 5 strength counters on this card. She could naturally use her 0 to put 5 strength counters on. She can also use it for like almost kind of like having a little bit of extra gas, like as an aggro deck. Like, you don't have draw power because you're red, but you could step your foot on the gas for a little bit to try to, you know, eke out another little bit of card damage. So like the flavor's there. And then she has that cutesy little Kirik trick of Judgment Callstone or Judgment tap for strength counters in response. But
I don't want to do that. She's got swiftness on the flip side.
Because she has swiftness, I think you kind of don't do that. But we do have Lilius here. She's a 12/12 with swiftness, and then she says, if a fire source you control would deal damage, it deals that much plus X 100, where X is the number of strength counters on this card.
Magic arrow goes pew, 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 pew.
Yeah, for sure. It's very interesting to me that, again, you could very much build this as a because we've already seen, as a card we'll talk about later, we've seen the instances of Pierce coming back. Like, Pierce is something that you can make use of. So you could very much build Lilius as like an aggro Pierce deck, or you could build it as a like burn deck. Like, even just in this design, you could see it both of those two ways. She does have good design, in my opinion. The fact that her, like, it's tied to her J ruler, right? So if you can kill her, okay, right? So I know that there's been a lot of people in the community who are just like, oh, turn 4 flip kill you, and I'm like, okay, if you do that, like, we know that's a thing, and it might steal a game 1, but it's probably not working game 2 and game 3, because then we're just going to kill Lilius in response to whatever you're trying to kill us with.
Faster aggro decks that don't require a 3-cost judgment.
Right. Like, right. It's not
going to 12/12 swiftness that can accidentally, oops, sorry, you're taking like 27 instead of 12.
Yeah.
So, like, if you don't have blockers on the board for the upcoming Lilius turn that you know is coming, that's
right.
on you, bud. Come on.
Right, exactly. And the other thing too to me is that she is the only one we've seen so far who has a judgment cost of 3. Like, they naturally tied this explosive, like, the gate is open, floodgate kind of damage to the highest cost judgment, which means at earliest you're judgmenting this, with what we know so far, at earliest you're judgmenting this as turn 4 or turn 3 with Energize. But if you were turn 3 judgmenting with Energize, you were probably already winning that game anyway, or you were so far behind that you were just going to lose if you didn't. Like, it's like, that feels like very polar. I don't know. Thoughts? Do you guys agree?
Oh, yeah, I agree with that. I think that the biggest thing about her is that she's very much like, Force Will games traditionally last about 5 turns on average, I would say.
5 to 6.
Give or take, yeah. Depending on the format. 3 if you're in Ultra format. But anyway, I digress. But in that kind of span of time, you're going to see Lilius Judgment maybe turn 3 or 4. And by that point, the game's halfway over. You've already established a board. You've established some damage on your opponent. If you knowingly tap yourself out into the Lilius Judgment turn, you know what you're getting. Like, you have to play smart against her.
Yeah.
But the fact that you have to play smart against her means that she's a well-designed ruler. I don't know. It's just...
Right.
That's just my thoughts. One of the biggest things I really, really like about her that I just wanted to go over was the fact that she has a really good early game tempo trigger, a really good mid game general like quality of life trigger, and a really good late game trigger if she dies. She's got
the ping.
A lot of ground covered.
Like the ping damage.
The ping's really good, but also the playing things off the top.
That's what I'm saying. It's like that little extra bit of gas when your like hand's a little bit dead and you're like, I'm not really drawing 2 things a turn, but I have kind of the capability to draw 2 things a turn.
Keurig used to do that. Keurig had the ability to just like look at the top, grab a battle chance.
Yeah.
I don't remember the names are.
We know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Battle arts.
Battle arts. Thank you.
Yeah.
Paul remembers. But just listen, I'm not a red player. I don't have to know these things. But
I'm not a red player either. I got tromped so bad by those things. It's like a scar.
Oh man.
Oh man.
But no, I think she's probably one of my favorite designs in terms of like the concept behind her out of all these rulers. Like, I really, really like the design they went with her. I really like the fact that she has inevitable damage and inevitable resource. Yeah. But she also has a lot of burst potential.
Right, I agree for sure. Definitely feels like a well-designed red.
It's like a retrain of Reflect, almost. Right?
A little bit.
A little bit like a retrained Keurig, a retrained Reflect. You're pinging a little bit of damage instead of boosting. So now your Demon Flames are all live. And then, they deal 1,000.
Yeah.
And then you look at the top card, like filter things, and it doesn't say what you do with the top card.
Yeah, Mad Pyromancer is definitely coming. It's a card where you can ping something. Yep, for sure.
Yeah, that's a good card.
It is. It's a good card.
It is a really good card.
So
spoilers.
Let's talk about blue. Arguably, blue has been the color that consistently across the board the community has never been excited about, or has always been the one that's making people go, except for Paul.
Except for me.
Except for Paul. We have Celesta, but we have Celesta, who arguably also
Yes.
is the only ruler who has different art on her front and back side, so that's automatically a little hype. But this
they're
new
doing.
concept of, oh, she does have judgment for 3. I apologize, but you're never
Mhm.
judgmenting her early anyway, so like 3 is irrelevant for her. So she has this concept of exploration, where you look at the top X cards of your deck, where X is the number of stones you have, get a treasure from among them, and remove it from the game. And then here's the thing. An X ability of once choose cards from your removed area that were removed by an exploration ability. Put a copy of each of those cards on the chase. This is like take it. So the reason why I like this is it's taking the identity for card draw that is blue in Force of Will for the most part, but like is making it card draw plus. Right? Because like card draw by itself doesn't win you a game. Like you need something to come out of the card draw. And that's been arguably some of the things that blue has lacked in, is like mid to late game win cons, or like stuff to really benefit from the fact that it's drawing a bunch of cards. Charlotte was close. Like Charlotte was like the closest we got to that. But Celesta by herself has this card draw plus in the fact that if she's removed it, it's actually just in her hand.
Yep.
Right? And so we were talking before the stream of, even if one of those treasures is draw a card, okay, I just have a card. I can just pay 1 to draw a card at instant speed every single turn during my turn. Great. I'm for it.
It's like to see more of my deck? Okay, great.
Right. So I think
Yeah.
I think this is a lot of fun. Just on the front side, I think it gives a better identity and strength to what blue is good at. Like buffs up what blue is good at to actually turn it into a value generator instead of just a hand advantage generator. One thing to note though, if for some reason, unless the rules change, someone was like, oh, you can just like, what about with Zeus Alice? If you put her as a copy on the chase, nothing happens. Like the copy of her will resolve and then nothing happens. It's the same reason why Shakti didn't put a second Zeus Alice into play when you copied when she cast. So like none of these are going to be resonators. But there could be treasures that say like a spell that puts a token into play, right? That could be something we could see. But none of these treasures are going to be resonators because it won't work. So let's get that out of the way right there. Oh yeah, that's the other thing too, is they could cost 5. Like a treasure could cost 5. Really, it just costs 1.
Yep.
For her, which I think is nuts. Like,
well, yeah.
Nuts.
One of the big things that I like about her is that she's actually very limited in her applications until the mid game. Because turn 1, you're like, okay, I'll look to the top card of my deck because I control 1 magic stone. Haha, oops, it's not a treasure. Put it back.
Right.
And just like the chance that you hit exactly what you want on turn 1 is like beyond low.
Yeah,
and that's
sure.
really, really nice in my opinion, because it gives her a lot of staying power, obviously. And it's like, all right, cool, I want to amass treasures, but I don't know how I can do that effectively if I don't see it turn 1 and have decent chances of seeing it turn 2. Like, turn 3 is probably where you're going to be guaranteed a treasure based on how much support I anticipate her having. Because you're not going to make a deck of only treasures.
Yeah, you're not.
Right.
Unless they're all insanely bonkers. But so quickly to address a question here, Travis James, it makes it cost 1 and in your hand. So it's pseudo in your hand because her exploration effect on the front side lets you like put copies of cards, that treasures that she's removed, onto the chase to like let them resolve. And the copy, like her exploration effect doesn't care about the cost of the treasure. It just pays X to put X treasures onto the chase. So like if you paid 2 and you had 2 treasures, one that cost 3, one that cost 4, doesn't matter. You've paid for that X effect. And so the X will take 2 treasures, copy them, and put them on the chase. So they cost 1 because you're paying for that X effect to like target it with her effect. So sorry for the weird wording there.
Something really important about her, obviously, we can't really judge her very well without knowing the treasures, but I think that if there's a treasure, say like a blue-green 1 treasure that puts the top card of your Magic Stone deck into play rested, she's insane. that's
Yeah,
my
for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. There's a
Ooh,
lot of
yeah.
different things that she could do. Toby, can you cancel the copy with a cancel spell? Yes. The other thing to note is that you couldn't cancel it with. You couldn't cancel it for free with don't cheat. Maybe you could if it's a chant. Because it's on, yeah, you could cancel it for free with don't cheat because it's a chant that's been put on the chase by something else. But anything that can cancel it would still be able to cancel it because it's still a card while it's on the chase. It's just a copy. On our backside, though, we've got this little 100/100 +7/+7 for each treasure in a removed area that was excavated or removed by an exploration effect. She gains Eternal as long as you have 5 or more treasuries with different names in your removed area. And then X, and then she still keeps that same clone effect on her backside. So her front side is what you're going to be using the most often because flipping to the back doesn't change how that ability works. It's just kind of, oh, now I have a 36/36 Eternal, and I'm doing that every turn. So, that's something to kind of keep in mind.
Something I want to mention: the little squirrel thing on her artwork is named Kiki, and I really hope he's a 1-drop that explores.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. Is it doesn't say that she has to be the one explores. It just says it has to be RFG'd by an exploration effect. Also, I really would like to see, because we know that he's like super duper. I mean, like, I don't think it can be, but like it was said in the lore that she's like Grubelesta's great grandma or something, and I'm like, man, Grubelesta, the best sage, like getting that like subtle nod, and I'm like, I'm about it.
Is he though? Is he?
Baby Grubelesta at the end of this cluster.
Little Babu Grubelesta. Hey Raya, Yorikaze, good to have you here. Yeah, no, I think of the rulers that we've talked about so far, I think she's the one who probably has the most pigeonholed deck design because her deck like mechanic is tied to a certain archetype. But that being said, I'm thinking about it like, what if there's like a bunch of different types of treasury items? So then what you're like exploring for changes how the deck gets built, right? So that could be a lot of fun.
I mean, we're getting at least 5 treasury items. I would imagine.
At least 5, right?
At least 5.
Because you have to have 5 different ones to give her Eternal.
And you can run a full play set of each of those cards. So you're looking at, I mean, you're not going to do full play sets of all of them, obviously, but you're going to be looking at the ones.
I'm also assuming that she's going to get support throughout the cluster.
Yeah.
Which would be so nice. Like if there was like a treasure or a treasure or 2 in every single set, that'd be
agreed.
So
because we don't know right now. It's assumed, but what happens when they say about assuming. It's assumed that we will be seeing more rulers throughout the cluster because there has not been any mention, as there was for Valhalla cluster, of these being the only rulers. When Valhalla cluster came out, they specifically told us it's these 10 for the cluster. When Alice Origins came out, that was not said at all, and we got rulers throughout the cluster. So it is probably pretty likely that we are going to be seeing rulers throughout the cluster because we feel like these would have been mentioned at the start. Again,
it also seems
assumptions.
Like going back to, it also, under assumption, it seems like they're going back to the way that things were done a little bit more in like Grim and Alice cluster, where obviously we've got rulers back in the box, we've got 6 rulers for the set instead of 1 ruler per set and 2 starter decks, or 3 rulers for the set. So if my calculations are correct, we got 10 rulers in New Valhalla, 12 in Alice Origin, which is kind of why the format felt kind of anemic in terms of your choices. If this continues as is, assuming that Ragnarok is the only void ruler, put it similar to like Grim cluster, we might have like a 21 ruler cluster,
potentially,
which would be really, really nice.
The other thing that's different about this cluster as opposed to Alice Origins cluster, which was 12, it was 12 rulers for 3 small sets and a big set. This will be 4 big sets. So that'll also play a big role in it. So it'll be very interesting. I think we might see 5 more, so we have 2 for each color, but who knows? We'll have to see.
That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Very SKL.
Or we could get like the same thing we did with Lapis, where we got 5 dual color rulers and then 5 more dual color rulers. That'd be sweet too.
I'd
I
be
would not
about
be
it.
opposed to it.
I'm not
I'd be
sure if
okay
they're
with
going to
that.
bring dual color back right after having a dual color cluster. Force Will's kind of typically alternated, but we'll have to see.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Speaking of people that we've seen in the past for being multicolor and now are single color, here's Welser, little kiddo Welser. So, arguably the most bland on his front side, but
You
at
said
the
that,
same
but
time,
that's
That's a
ability.
saucy effect.
but it's a sick effect, and it's also the
Oh,
only
yeah.
one that triggers on both players' turns. So that's a kid
Yeah.
thing to notice here. So on his
Mm-hmm.
on his front side, judgment for 0, but you can only judgment at 10 stones, which, by the way, signals that greed is going back to its ramp roots, like in the heartbeat. That like immediately signals it. And then it says
man.
whenever you play a chant. The first time you play a chant each turn, you recover a magic stone you control because it only triggers once per turn. But it doesn't say during either player's turn or during only your turn, so it's both players' turns. Which, to me, if he's going into being a control deck that ramps, really is well designed to make it so that he can trigger during both players' turns, because of the fact that like the game's fast.
Game's real fast, bud.
So like having a deck that can like use spells to kind of mitigate the early game and keep itself up on like will advantage in the early turns, I think will be very, very important. Having a ramp deck that can ramp while also keeping itself safe will also be very important.
Something important also to note. Now we see why they printed Sylvan Delight as an addition instead of a chant.
Because good forethought of the fact that Welser can't just double Seal of Wind and let you.
Imagine 1 mana Seal of Wind and Light, said Mike as he cried himself to sleep once again.
Yeah, that would have been bad. But on his backside, we get this. He has Barrier. He's a fox, essentially, on his backside. He can't do combat. He has Barrier. He doesn't have Eternal, so you could...
I don't believe Fox had Barrier. I think Fox just
said you can't be destroyed, right? So, but he's like a
Which is actually
pseudo...
really
Yeah. And then enter,
I think
shuffle
there's only one
all
card
cards.
that can kill him, and I'm pretty sure it's Ragnarok. But continue.
Yeah. Shuffle all cards from your hand and all non-magic stone cards from your graveyard into your deck. Shuffle all magic stones from your graveyard into your magic stone deck and draw 5 cards. So you essentially reset your deck when he flips. Reset your opening hand to 5 cards. Whenever you play a chance, recover target magic stone you control. Just, again, keeps that ability. But now it says whenever a chant you play is put into the graveyard, you get to put it back into your hand. So all of your spells become...
That one's not once per turn.
Magic Arrow.
That's not once per turn. Well, Magic Arrow doesn't matter because it's coming back to your hand anyway.
No, you don't understand. It's the combo. You put the Magic Arrow back in your hand, you play the Magic.
Exactly.
Now
I was
you
like
have-
everything becomes a Magic Arrow now.
Yeah, everything essentially becomes a Magic Arrow, which is kind of his concept. So obviously what we're going to probably be dealing with Welser is a very spell slingy heavy. Probably his win con is going to be tied to a spell in some way, shape, or form. This is probably going to be a ruler that feels very much like if I've flipped, then the game is over, just in design. But again, the nice part is that there's actually nothing on him that ties him to green.
Yep.
Like there's nothing on. You could build him as like a discard heavy deck where you're just like, okay, discard, or
you can still play him with like white and just get like 0 mana Schrodinger's Crying and Intimidations to stall out the game.
right. Like there's a lot of things that you can do with him.
The late game, bud. If you get to the late game and he flips and you have Intimidation, your opponent cannot damage you.
Yeah, you literally just cast Intimidation and you can't ever take damage. Like you just, oh, somebody got to tell Zach Tuffer that there's a fog deck.
Oh, there's a fog ass deck if I've ever seen one.
Oh goodness gracious!
gosh.
But like, I really like it because it's not. This is again going back to what we said about the first two, is when you look at him, your mind can go in a bunch of different directions with how you're going to build him. You have an idea of like what his focus is going to be, but it's not like this is the only thing you can ever do with that ruler, which is the hype of Force of Will, right? And so I think design wise he's great.
Something really important to note about him too is that not only is he the ruler with the most, like, I would say he has the most pigeonholed endgame idea to him out of all the ones we've seen, but he has the most versatility in terms of what you can do to facilitate whatever combo he goes into, which is really, really nice, like, risk, reward, and rewarding creative players.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is something we haven't seen in the game in quite a while. At least not to my recollection, right? It's been a few clusters since we've had a ruler that has this level of flexibility. And when they made those kinds of rulers in the past, they were meant to be broken. They were meant to be in every single deck, right? And they were meant to just go all over the place. But we don't have.
I don't know. This one, I don't feel that way. I feel like this one is very much like you have your focus and you have what the deck's really good at, which is where the versatility kind of stops. Where it's like, oh, if my deck's trying to do this, that doesn't seem like a Welser kind of deck. But it's like, if I'm going like heavy control and this deck plays a lot of chance, maybe Welser is in considerations.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. There's nothing about him that when I look at him, I go, oh yeah, there's no reason to play anybody else. Because again, his effect, his zero cost effect is passive. Which you can build to passive to capitalize on it. But a lot of the other rulers have pressure building zeros, which is, again, like, sometimes you're going to want to be able to have that pressure or generate advantage. I don't think... Oh, we lost Mike Grants. He'll come back.
Bye, Mike.
We're back.
I don't think we... I don't think he's going to be the next Sherry. I don't think he's going to be the next RR. I think they've designed him well so that you can build him very, very flexibly, and theoretically you could probably build any deck you want with him, but he himself doesn't like give so much oomph that every deck is going to be better if your ruler is Welser. Like, if you build an aggro deck, I guess you can play Thunder and then play a 1-drop aggro card that receives no buffs for the rest of the game. Okay,
Well,
I guess you can, but like, do you want to when you also have Lilius, who's like, yeah, but what if all your aggro dudes just like did 1,200 more damage?
1,500 more damage, but don't forget, it's 5 strength counters.
Nah, we played a Welser. We played an Allosaurus to steal 3 of your strength counters.
How could you? That's so mean. Wow.
Well, I was just going to mention, I don't know, because spoiler alert for later in the podcast, but there is a reprint, another reprint, like pseudo reprint, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, if there are any other reprints that come into this, how does this affect how this ruler is played?
If Blissing Mutual is back in or Magic Stone Analysis, then we're getting Vice.
Oof. Yeah, if either of those, like in any kind of ramp reprints that we've seen outside of like the 4-cost get 2 basic stones one, is gonna definitely get. I mean,
but if you cast it, you can put it back in your hand. So maybe. Well, no, it's still pretty bad. Okay,
that's still pretty bad.
It's really bad.
So yeah, it'll be interesting to see exactly kind of how he shapes up. But I mean, again, like a lot of even just looking at him, I see a lot of different ways to build it, which gets my hype up, which is again really good to kind of go back to that feel with Force Well. Next up, we have what is to be defined for all time as the biggest ruler to J ruler glow up in Force Will history. We have our good old friend Mikage, bringing in this concept of his zero cost isn't really because he has to sacrifice his own stuff, but he's in black and they have Sigurd, so like that doesn't seem bad. Banish a resonator, draw a card, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target resonator you control. Play this ability only during your turn and only once per turn. I like the fact that this is only during your turn because it doesn't give you like, oh, I'm gonna make your removal less efficient, right? Like
he's not a Leviton.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like just a sack outlet. Like you actually have to sacrifice something on your turn. That being said, his whole mechanic is probably going to be about sacrificing. So like. Okay.
Hey boys, hope you're all ready for Layla format and the Eternal formats. Yay!
Oh my gosh, just natural turn 1 Layla. Although you'd have to have 2 resonators to trigger that, so it won't work because you have to put. It says on a target resonator you control. So.
Hang on, what's the Nameless Mist? wording. Hang on, I'm looking this up. I have to
Here we
know.
Brewing in real
Did we
time.
accidentally break it? Oh, no, it's on a residue you control. Damn, Jeremy's schooling me on the schooling podcast.
This is my office hours.
And I need it now.
And you need it. So really interesting on the front. It naturally, Darkness does typically want to do a lot of stuff during its turn anyway. It's kind of what Darkness has always been about. Is like very weirdly enough being very proactive. So
it's about planning ahead, which
right.
is the
exactly
scheming evil Darkness guy.
Yeah,
thing.
so it makes sense to me that like sacrificing your own unit to try to get advantage to move forward. We've also seen that Darkness frequently has precision. That has actually been a keyword that's been tied to Darkness quite frequently. So suddenly being able to say like, oh, cool, I'm going to throw this little tiny minion under the bus, make my other minion bigger that maybe has precision, especially if we see like a revenge, which we'll talk about here in a second, like the revenge mechanic be like, if you revenge this turn, this guy has precision. Suddenly you're like, oh, cool, great. I put 2 counters on it. I paid, I got a card, and now I get to have precision to kill your big guy. That kind of like trickery, mind game kind of stuff is what Darkness is good at. And so it's cool to see that kind of theming come out of Mikage. On his backside, though, he just is like, nah, I'm going to just end the game. It's fine. So Mikage Seijiro, Interdimensional Messenger, flying, has to pay black and banish a Resonator to destroy target J Resonator. So just by himself can kill a J Ruler, which is crazy. Lowest stats of all the J Rulers we've seen so far in terms of on initial flip.
I guess.
On initial flip. I mean, like, are you actually flipping Celesta when you have 1 treasure flipped?
No, you flip her with no treasures flipped to establish dominance.
Okay. So then revenge, if an entity, it's a new concept. If an entity was you control was sent to the graveyard this on the field this turn, this card gains the following effects. He gains drain, eternal, and +10/+10. It was pointed out to me that according to this wording, we'll have to wait for the CR to say officially, but everything we've seen about this wording shows us that this is not a trigger. It is a continuous, like, state-based game check, so it won't go multiple times, which means
there's
that,
no
like,
colon, there's
my question.
There's no colon, there's no trigger arrows, so like it won't use the chase. So like the second something hits grave, Mikage turns into a 20/20 with drain.
Yeah, it's just a continuous trigger if the condition has been met.
But it won't happen like to its multiple times, which I think is important. Which is again that good balancing of like that. So I like this guy a lot. I like him a lot. The idea of being able to give himself natural protection. We have seen Mikage in cards before have ways to give eternal. So a flavor, right, goes back into that. The fact that for 1 darkness, just by paying the important thing here is that by paying his cost, he can give eternal. So he is going to be very sticky. Like once Mikage flips, he is going to be very, very sticky. So like you could build a version of this that's just get to 2 stones, flip, play 1-drops. Right? You could very much build that. So like play a 1-drop, have 1 to be able to banish it. So like something like a reprint of Monkey Trapped in Life. Immediately you can build this like aggro Mikage variant, right? So good stuff.
I see.
Drain doesn't stack, so that didn't matter. It was more like stacking the +10/+10 multiple times for like a 1-shot.
Couple of thousand buffs. I will say that Mikage is unfortunately my least favorite design-wise of the rulers so far. He definitely feels the most, kind of just generally linear in what he wants to do. His 0-cost ability is the only one, as you just pointed out to me actually, that you really can't use turn 1. So it's like you kind of have to build a board to establish the board, and you can't build the board if you're banishing your own stuff. So there's a lot of back and forth, which I like. But it feels like the payoff is just kind of like, all right, he's big.
Yeah, we'll have to see exactly what the revenge support is.
Yeah, because
especially
I
in
do
the
like that
early
as a
game.
keyword on a lot.
Like, because that'll be a big indicator of like how much is he using his ability in the opening turns.
Yep.
Because it also says entity. That's something that's important to note. Is revenge says an entity you control. So
Ooh.
it could be additions, it could be stones, it could be
Stack a
anything.
building.
Well, I mean that's out of rotation, but
it's out of rotation.
but like that's an important note there too. So we could definitely see, you know, some different things out of Mikage that come out of like maybe sacrificing a stone here or there. The other thing too is we haven't seen any of these ruler special stones. So that is going to be really, really interesting. At this point in time, we can pretty much predict that they're going to be single color plus a bonus effect because all of these rulers are multicolored. We'll have to see, but there's definitely some cool stuff there, and yeah, I'm excited. I agree with you that his front side effect is like kind of weird, if not directly tied to his archetype, but that's not to say that it couldn't be used in a different way.
I'm very excited to see a revenge card that gains swiftness so that we could just have Mikage aggro.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And then lastly, in
But
terms of the
definitely not
rulers,
least.
we have our big boy. It's Ayu, except before it was Ayu, we have Ragnarok, the invading dragon lord. So it's our void ruler. So one thing to note is that it does state in the CR that if a ruler is void, it will gain and energize for 1 void. It says you may have no more than 1 copy of any card in your deck. And then this is the complicated part, so I'll kind of try to explain it. So it's an X cost activate ability that you can only use during your turn, but you can use it as many times as you want during your turn. But you can only use each of its 6 modes 1 time total in the course of a game. And so the other caveat here is every time you activate it, it costs 1 more, starting with cost 0. So the first time you use it, it costs 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. And then you can only use each mode once. And the modes are, the first mode is produce 2 will in any attribute combination. The second is copy target chant spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. 3 is draw 3 cards. 4 is remove all additions and regalia your opponent controls from the game and remove their graveyard from the game. Number 5 is destroy all J rulers, and number 6 is remove all resonators your opponent controls from the game. So this ruler's gimmick is essentially just a big old nope. Like, that's just what he wants to do. He just wants to say nope all the time. Right off the bat, the singleton mechanic for him alleviates like 60-70% of my concern with this ruler.
Yep.
We've talked about how there's a lot of things that people are talking about, oh, look at all these crazy things you could do. Like because you can use his ability multiple times. It's like, oh, on turn 1 on the draw, you can like pay 0 to produce 2 will, and then pay a 2 cost chant, and then pay 1 to copy it. And I'm like, yes, you could indeed do that. Please list to me all of the 2 cost chants that you want to copy that you get to play 1 of. To me, it's this idea of very, very high risk, very, very high reward, because it's not comparable to Ayu, because Ayu had natural synergy to be able to search out its deck inherently by itself and also generated pressure by itself. Ragnarok...
Ayu was a big win con.
Right. Ragnarok by itself does not win you a game. It literally has no way to win you the game. It can't flip. It can't actually inflict damage to your opponent. It can't do anything.
It can't OTK your opponent.
It can't OTK your opponent. Like, you have to rely on your main deck for this, and your main deck is singletons. So your nut hands will be absolutely nuts. Like, if you get a nut hand with Ragnarok, it will be insane. Like, none of us are going to argue against that. However, you don't have a major consistency booster outside of burning your 0 cost for draw 3 cards. And, like, you are running singletons with a Void Ruler, which then cuts you off from a comfortable turn 1. Like it makes his early game kind of weird, and then it makes his later game like, okay, well, you answered all my good cards.
The one thing I will say that we can do on turn 1, though, is pay 0 to produce 2 wills of any attribute. Doesn't matter what they are, because you're going to dive the Kusanagi Motoko and then play it and shut off your opponent's 1-drop. And we've got the Playboys. That's it. We're done. Call the Regalia. Game's over. Let's go home.
Again, still have to have the one of Kusanagi Motoko in your opening hand.
Leave the cards here. We'll draw it every time.
So, yeah, this is very interesting to me. I do want to hear Paul's thoughts on this one.
Yeah, this is pretty fresh.
So we were talking about this a little bit when this first got spoiled, and we didn't know at the time, like we had missed that line where it said one of, and so we were talking about that. And initially, I was like, "This thing is the most broken thing I've ever seen in Force of Will." Like, this is the ruler to play right now, obviously, but now that it's like a singleton sort of thing, it really does enable for me a lot of, I can just play whatever stones I want. I can kind of carve out what Ayu was doing. It's the same still kind of play style where you have to plan out your early game, right? And you have to say, what I want to do is inevitably end up here. But you also have to think about your win con in a different way, because obviously you're not going to be flipping and having Eternal and all this other fun stuff. So this is probably the deck. If you really want to get better at Force of Will, you probably want to play Ragnarok for at least a little bit to kind of get a sense of how do you build your deck? How do you make optimal card choices? And so I think newer players are really going to want to latch onto this if they want to get better fast.
This is definitely going to improve your card analysis skills because of the fact that, like, Ragnarok by himself provides 0 synergy. Like, he creates thinking about your deck and thinking about a card in a vacuum by itself, because he himself has no ties to the main deck. So, like, your cards in your main deck have to kind of stand on their own. And so, like, I can agree with that. That's a good point. That, like, playing Ragnarok,
your first experience with mid-range, all your cards have to do something.
Yeah, for sure. Playing with Ragnarok is certainly going to improve your sense of like card evaluation. Like, how much does this card actually stand by itself? Unless your name is Minha or Lars, because neither of them care about luck and will just like, oh, I have the nut hand 7 games in a row, and I'm like, how?
Yeah. Listen, man. IU one tricks have to get their karma somewhere.
Exactly.
Well, it's also notable that this is in the first set, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to be playing this with all the cards in the first set. You're going to be playing with these cards from the first set, plus all of the multicolor cards that we got from the previous cluster. So, like, that's where all the power is. So you're going to have to figure out, what does my stone base need to look like in order for me to do X, Y, and Z? It's a beginner's deck, but it's also a high skill.
It's also going to be the least good at the start because there are so few cards in the game right now.
The other thing
going into
the other
it's
thing
only going to
too,
get stronger.
The other thing too is he doesn't have a 5-color stone because they made him void outside of Ruler's Memoria, which, if you're playing a Regalia that gives your J Ruler a buff when you are playing a ruler that doesn't have a J Ruler side, you're probably doing it wrong. Which means you're not playing Ruler's Memoria, right? And Autoraktia's Memoria will only produce Void. So actually, I don't think Autoraktia's Memoria will actually produce anything, because it says produce 1 will of an attribute shared by your ruler, and Void is not an attribute. So you literally can't play Autoraktia's Memoria. Don't do it. So that'll be really interesting too for his deck limitations, because like he will have to kind of decide what dual stones he wants to try to rely on, unless they somehow bring back IU's Spirit Stone, which feels very weird. Like in my opinion, if they were going to bring back IU's Spirit Stone for like that kind of concept, they would have just made him a 5-color ruler. So like it makes me feel comfortable that that's not going to happen. Yeah, I guess you could play. I guess you could play him as a singleton void deck, but if you want to play a pure void deck, just go play Major, or like go play Aramaki, because he will do it better. Like he will do it better than Tron than Shin
Imagine
will.
being able to draw every time you play a card from the die variant instead of drawing 3 cards once.
Yeah, right. Like, yeah. There's a lot of different things that you can do with this guy.
Also, something very important to note about Ragnarok is that a lot of people's complaints going into cluster format, especially from the complaints we heard from Italy, is that Italy, Germany, all those areas over there, is that Rizard was totally dominant. Everything he did was way better than everyone else because there was little to no interaction with his road and the speed at which he put things onto the board into the graveyard. Ragnarok can remove the road and the graveyard for 0.
Yep, because Road specifically said targeted. That cards can't be targeted in your grave. And Ragnarok is like, yeah, whatever.
And you remove the Death Scythe.
When anything references Rhea, with anything that references in your deck, it's referencing main deck, I believe. I don't think he'll have to have singleton stones. We'll have to see. I think that reference, because I think that's the same wording that IU had. Mike, go look it up. Look up the wording of IU on her front side. As I think that if it references in your deck, it's specifically referring to the main deck, so you should still be able to have multiple of a different stone. Geez, Magic Stone of Moonshade as a reprint.
Ew. Oh no, please
not. I heard you like Magna being the best deck in format.
IU has the exact same wording.
Yeah, so
Stone
deck will be fine. But enough of these rulers. We do have one more thing to talk about, and that is the concept of split cards. Arguably, the humor here is that the first one, half of it is a reprint of Split Heaven and Earth. So the first split card is a split reprint.
It's a split card.
So first off, this is a super rare, which is very interesting. Important to note here. So this is a new type of card that's being brought out. It is functionally the card name is card 1 bracket card 2. That is its individual name, which is functionally different than the reprint. So like right now in Wanderer or Epic Stories or whatever, you could play this card, Ground Splitter Rabbit / Split Heaven and Earth, and you could play Split Heaven and Earth. It functions, they're both functionally different cards. So the way these works, is Ground Splitter Rabbit. When you cast the card from hand, you choose which of the 2 modes you want to cast it as, and that determines your cost. You can cast it as a Resonator and pay the Resonator cost, which is in the upper left corner, or you can cast it as the spell, which is in the bottom left corner. Important things to note, that if a card says that you could search for one or the other of those specific names, you can search for the split card. So like if a card says search for a Ground Splitter Rabbit, you could search for a Ground Splitter Rabbit / Split Heaven and Earth. But one important thing to note is while this card is in your hand or in the deck, it is treated with the cost of both halves combined. So this card, while it is a 1-cost Resonator or a 2-cost Chant, when it is in your hand or deck, it is a 3-cost card. This is an important distinction for things like Percival, Red Percival, or anything else of that nature. Red Percival is kind of the first one that comes to mind, but it's important to note. It's also important to note that these split cards would then proc like 3 triggers off of Lilius or 3 triggers off of Oberozuki or something like that. So it's important to kind of note those. SR, let's be honest, Split Heaven and Earth is 99% of that rarity. So very, very interesting here. I think, unfortunately, there's a little bit of, I don't mind this design in terms of like There are things that I think could have been better, like putting the attack and defense back up on the left to fall in line with the resonator. I think that it's about as much black as we were already getting. It's just been shifted to like the left side and the bottom. I think
I'm just honestly surprised that the attack and defense is still in the bottom right. It feels like it was just this opportunity to not continue having it in the top left, because that's where the resonator is going to be, from what we can tell.
From what we can tell so far. And I'll again speak to the fact that like this is artwork that wasn't designed for this layout being plugged into this layout. So like split looks weird because it wasn't designed for this card formatting. So I'll have to see if like what new split cards look like, or what, stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see.
Also, what a non-full art split card looks like, because this one is in fact full art.
Or maybe all split cards are full arts, like
that would be
foil or not.
Weird,
right? So we'll have to foil or not, if they're not full arts or not. We'll have to see. There's a lot of things.
I had one question.
Yes.
So, in your opinion, does Dark Alice's smile still remove this card?
This would be technically it's a chant. It's treated in hand as a resonator and a chant, so you could still hit this card.
You could hit it with any discard spell.
Yep.
So you can potentially rip this out, and your opponent doesn't have their 1-drop for turn 1.
Potentially. Yep.
Absolutely. I like that.
Yeah. So I think it's cool to see this design space. It's kind of the natural evolution. We've seen this done in other card games before.
I do like the fact that it's between Resonator and Chance. I think in Magic we saw often like instances of
artifacts. Yeah.
No, not even different card types. Normally the same card type, just that could be played from different styles. I think it's actually a little bit easier on the player, especially like from like a commentator's perspective. When somebody plays a card and you're like, oh, what mode are they choosing? You can tell because either it's on the chase and goes away, or it's on the board and stays on the board. And you're like,
right,
aha, I see which version they chose.
As a commentator, yeah, I'm about it.
That's my shtick for the next year. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, I think this is cool. I think this is a really, to me, this is kind of a really neat way to bring reprints back. Because I know that Alice Origins set 3, set 4, with the reprints that we saw come back, wasn't nearly as bad as like Alice Origins set 1 or set 2, in terms of like which reprints they chose and how many. But doing something like this, where like a reprint exists but it's tied to something else, still gives us like, oh, cool. Like my old card is back, but it can also be something new. So like it provides some additional. It takes the sting out of a reprint a little bit, and also kind of brings some of the excitement of a reprint back too. Like, oh, I wouldn't, in this format, do I think I would play just a straight split Heaven and Earth? Probably not. Yeah. But would I play a card that could be a resonator and then suddenly become a split if I need to? Yeah, I'd be much more inclined to play that. So I'm excited.
I agree with that. Another thing that I know I talked to you guys about earlier, I think maybe before we even started chatting, was the fact that this thing, the split cards can actually go above the will color symbols on a card. Like if there's like a light split card that's like 4 light on one card and 4 light on the other, that's an 8 light total.
Which is not possible. Which is not possible for anything else. Yeah, for sure.
Which I really, really enjoy, because I want to split. I want to reveal. I want that to be printed. I want to reveal that off Oberozuki
on turn 1.
I want to get my 1-drop 8+1/+1 counters. That's all I want.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the high rule.
I'll wait till more cards come to Pass Judgment, as you should, Babatunde.
Because
we've seen 7 of them. We've seen 7 of them, like of a 115 card set.
9?
So
we've seen 9. Because we got the 2 promos too, didn't we?
Oh, sure.
The 1-drops.
Sure, we've seen 9. So yeah, so technically we've seen 9 out of 115 cards. There's still a lot to go. Yeah, I'm excited. Like, even just, it's been a really long time. Since before New Valhalla, where we got like actual ruler excitement, because Alice Origins Cluster was, you could tell what a ruler was going to do in a sense, before it even got spoiled. You were like, some kind of stranger trigger, some kind of removal trigger, some type of card draw trigger of some sort, judgment for 0. Like those were like the putty that you knew was going to happen. And going into this week, I had no idea what these rulers were going to do, or what even theming wise they were going to be like. And that was really exciting. That made, like, even though it was just a ruler, like, I was talking about that ruler for the rest of the day.
I would actively go into my group chats and be like, guys, whoa, guys, they spoiled Welser, guys.
Yeah, so I think and we haven't had that since New Valhalla was spoiled, because they spoiled the 10 rulers for New Valhalla, and then we just didn't have new rulers to talk about for 2 years.
It's been a rough 2 years.
It has been a rough 2 years. I'm very excited. I'm very, very excited for this lack of templating rulers. We spoke about how AO4 was like a signaling that they were moving away from templated rulers, that they were moving away from extra decks, and moving towards like ruler identities.
One deck, 2 decks, because we got the stone deck, but 2 decks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
I'm about it. First 2 made me think it was going to be generic till the blue ruler was spoiled. Then, oh baby, yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
We got crazy. So of the, I don't really count Ragnarok when I'm like thinking of the rulers right now, because like
he's so different. Really,
he's so different. Yeah. In terms of like, because again, he himself isn't a win con, so he doesn't really like excite me about like, oh man, this is so cool, I'm so excited. It's just kind of like, okay, there's a ruler that I could choose that just says no to my opponent a bunch. Of the 5, I think Celesta probably has me the most excited to play. I don't know, what about you guys?
I'm honestly, part of me's partial to Ragnarok, just to see what kind of garbage I can put into a deck and make it work.
That's fair.
But in all honesty, like as you mentioned, Celeste is definitely on the top of my list. But I really, really like the tempo that Oberozuki gives, and the kind of open headspace that Welser gives me. Because like I feel like I can come up with some garbage to work with Welser. Like absolute extreme poop trash beyond belief.
You wouldn't be Mike Rance if you weren't.
It's what I do, bud. It's what I do.
Oh goodness.
Paul, what about you?
I think I'm definitely on the Ragnarok train too, mostly because, like Mike was talking about earlier, you can almost kind of see what they were thinking about when they were making it. Design wise, it's meant to be a card that you sit down and say, what can't it do? And that's your way of sort of figuring out what deck you want to play with it, right? So it can't use a lot of consistency, right? If it's going to go 5 color, you have to go into all these different stones. You have to like think about the kind of stone base you want to have. It's creating like a lot of restrictions while also creating a lot of freedom at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's just a playground of a ruler. I'd probably say Celesta too, because like, I'm always gonna be hyped for a blue ruler. I mean, I've been hyped for blue since Kaijudo days, right? But I think. Oh, I know. I got it. You can see it right here. There's the
giant table mat.
Also, I just want to know what those merit badges on her vest or on her shirt are.
Right.
What are those merit badges? What did you?
Treasures?
They're for each GP she topped.
She's already topped 4. She's topped 4. The season hasn't even started yet. OP.
She's like,
OP, please, man.
Please ban I Spy.
She's from ahead in our timeline, and so like when we're going toward the GP season,
she's behind
we
the timeline.
acquire the GPs.
That's the other thing that I'm very excited about with these 6 rulers is doing content for them. Because there's going to be so many different ways to build all of them. So like going into this, pretty much this whole last 2 clusters, outside of like I think maybe 1 or 2 feature matches for the past 2 years, we have actively avoided mirrors for like the weekly feature matches, because so much of mirrors was just these are the same deck. And these 6 feel very comfortable that we're going to have some fun like opportunities for some mirrors, like a Ragnarok mirror.
Sounds stupid.
with a Ragnarok mirror with 2 players who have talked not at all about what style of Ragnarok they're building, so they could be 2 completely different decks. Makes me very excited.
CCG Prime just said ARG pins for Celesta. Yeah, dude. She beat all 4 Argent Saga players left.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
No, but I think there's a lot of fun exploration space here, and it really gets me excited for content production and like doing that kind of stuff. So
feels like the good old days of Grim Cluster, buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we would like just either you and Nick would like just come to the table with like all of these different ideas and these different decks.
I have Blue Grim. Hi, I have Blue Grim.
Exactly. Yeah. Like Ragnarok, like functionally is the Grim of this cluster so far, and that's what makes it so cool in a lot of ways, right? The same basic design philosophy.
Oh, I do like that.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. I'm very excited, and like, I really hope we get. Steven said that like. What did he say? He said they need to pick up the pace with the spoilers, getting the shakes over here. I'm like, I'm a little bit.
Listen,
y'all got any more of them spoilers? I need a little bit more of them spoilers.
So the one thing I really hope for, I'm really hoping that we get a split card for green that has Blessing of Yggdrasil on it. Because all I want to do. All I want to do in this life of mine
is grab a 1-of copy of Ruler's Memoria, so then you're just fine to go. Like, stop it.
You're thinking way too small time, Jeremy. Come on now. You think that I would do that? You think I would make something not that less than jank? I want to put the Tron Stones in my deck. I want to put 4, 3, and 3. I want to hit one of them, and I want to go, okay, turn 1, produce green in another color that doesn't matter. Bless of Yggdrasil, get the last one. Copy that Yggdrasil, get the last one. Have all the Tron Stones on turn 1, ready to go for turn 2. Clap them.
With the 1 copy in your deck?
With the 1 copy in my deck.
Just...
Excuse me, got it.
Yeah, you living that dream. So with that, we are going to call it for tonight. Thank you guys so much for being here. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. This has been a lot of fun. We'll probably stick to, since we're now in the off season, we'll probably stick to office hours on a weekly basis for now. Because we can come back at the end of it and talk about that week's spoilers or anything else that we're seeing. If you guys liked it, go ahead and click that like and subscribe button there. And if you want to support us financially, of course, you can click that join button down below to become a member here on the channel. We are at 68 members right now, which is huge by comparison to where we were a year ago.
It's just 69.
Yeah,
Mike, you don't disappoint.
So I set that up for Mike specifically. But I did just want to say, that is a year ago we were at about 12. So to be up to 68 has been very, very gracious. It's how we bought this new microphone and everything else. So we're very, very grateful for all of that support. But until next time, office hours are officially over. So this has been DMO73, and I have been joined by my Grants.
Make it 69, boys. Make it 69.
And finally joining us with his face, the beautiful Paul Reisman. And we will see you all next time. So until then, class dismissed. Have a good night, everybody.
See you, everybody.
Good night, friends.